Thank you. Honored guests, faculty, and colleagues, my name is Beth Grund. I'd like to tell you about my DNP project, Stepping Away from the Path, a transformational journey affirming emic food security practices on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. My interest in families having enough food began after my father passed away without leaving much insurance. My mom worked nights as a private duty nurse to support us. I remember that she liked to tell people that she always had a bag of apples or oranges in the refrigerator for us kids to snack on. And at the time, it was so embarrassing. As I reflect back, Mom's willingness to share this information must have meant that we were living pretty close to the edge. I'd lived on the Pine Ridge Reservation with family friends off and on as a teenager. Augsburg gave me the opportunity to revisit a place, a land, with which I feel a deep connection. Since beginning my DNP studies at Augsburg, I've returned to Pine Ridge 6 times. I was dismayed to find that food there is not readily available. Many speakers at the 5 Nobel Peace Prize forums that I've attended have called attention to the myth of scarcity. Dominant groups use this fallacious argument to justify hoarding abundant resources for their own use. Refusal to share is a central reason why the United States Millennium Development Goal #1 remains an elusive dream. Countless people are still hungry and poor. There are many definitions of food security, but the one that I like best comes from a nursing professor who states that food security is having a steady access to sufficient, clean, safe, and nutritious foods for an active, healthy life. People are able to acquire necessary foods without having to scavenge or steal. During my DNP studies, my interest expanded to include ways that low food security in Pine Ridge might be alleviated. The 3 goals of my project are to examine the transformational process of outsiders, or our big academic word, edic, learning from the insider, or emic culture, on the issue of food security practices at Pine Ridge. To draw attention to emic interventions to being hungry and poor, and to raise awareness among nurses that the condition of low food security is itself a health disparity. My project was one of personal transformation, and it was inspired by the nursing theories of both Madeline Leininger and Margaret Newman. Mary Mousseau, a Lakota public health nurse who had become a good friend, accompanied me as a cultural guide. A change of focus to one-on-one relationships and listening resulted in a sea change in my thinking about Lakota food security. Spending time in Lakota sacred places such as Bear Butte and Harney Peak created a climate that fostered self-reflection. I became increasingly aware of my own cultural bias. This photograph captures a stream at Pipestone, a sacred place for Lakota people. In my Nursing 800 class, Ruth Ennisvet acquainted us with Scott's rules of thumb. Mine, taken from my time as a voc rehab counselor, are as follows. Set aside personal judgment. Avoid preconceived ideas about expectations. And use active listening while remaining aware of cultural communication differences. In retrospect, I should have paid more attention to Scott's admonition to expect the unexpected. He cautioned that people who are involved in a project either already have or will soon develop the necessary expertise to improve it. Leininger's theory of culture, care, diversity, and universality provided the underpinnings of my project. 2 of her observations that I found especially relevant are, care is the essence of nursing, and culturally beneficial nursing care only occurs when emic, folk, or insider cultural care values, expressions, and patterns are known, honored, and practiced. The essence of Leininger's theory is captured by her Sunrise Enabler model. The Sunrise Enabler includes 7 dimensions: technological, religious and philosophical, kinship and social, cultural values, beliefs, and life ways, political and legal, economic, and educational. Leininger has specifically stated that study of these influencers can shed light on causational factors that contribute to low food security for a population. Conversely, the Sunrise Enabler also highlights influences that can help low food security to increase. In Nursing 807 with Joyce Perkins, we studied Margaret Newman's theory of expanding consciousness. Her theory depicts a continuous two-way flow of energy between an individual and the surrounding world. Each person's pattern represents an evolving human environment process to which we give meaning. Newman states that consciousness is the informational capacity of a system and that it is revealed in the evolving pattern of the whole. Finally, Newman believes that our lives represent a continuous process of the expansion of our consciousness. In the Lakota culture, illness in an individual is seen as an indicator of health in the family or community. In the words of Wendell Berry, a noted social critic, the health of a population reflects the environment that surrounds it. The condition of these substandard homes is better than that of many reservation dwellings. Although these homes are close together, most people on the reservation live in remote rural areas. The unavailability of quality housing means that people have no choice other than to live in dilapidated homes that can be far away from both health and food resources. The beauty of the Lakota people lessens the realization that Pine Ridge encompasses the second poorest county in the entire United States. People who live there are not only poor. In addition to low food security and inadequate housing, they have to deal with challenges related to limited health care resources. Average life expectancy on the reservation is actually decreasing. It is currently only 48 years old for men and 52 years old for women. Diabetes there has reached epidemic proportions. According to Centers for Disease Control data, the rate of diabetes is over 19%. That's more than twice as high as the United States average. Unofficial estimates run much higher. Based on what I've observed, I think it is likely that at least 50% of the Lakota people, including many children, have diabetes. All nurses know that diabetes is closely connected to diet. Few nurses are aware of research documenting that the existence of low food security is an independent risk factor for diabetes. A large share of Pine Ridge health challenges are directly related to colonialist actions that began in 1851. A series of broken treaties continually relocated the Lakota people to progressively remote and marginal lands. A fair share of the reservation is located in the Badlands. Pine Ridge is highlighted in green on the map. An 80-year government policy aimed at cultural annihilation meant that generations of children grew up in boarding schools, separated from their families for up to years at a time. They were forbidden to speak the Lakota language, keep their Lakota names, or practice anything to do with their traditional culture. Additionally, the United States has never honored its treaty obligations. Because the majority of Native Americans live in a few states with minimal representation in Congress, the myth of scarcity means that there is little impetus for things to change. Take health. Funding for the Indian Health Service lags far behind other federal programs. For example, the U.S. government spends twice as much on federal prisoners per capita as it does on the Indian Health Service. All of this has resulted in a pattern of intergenerational poverty and a profound mistrust of people from the edict or outsider culture, even nurses. The photograph on the left is of the memorial which marks the mass grave of Lakota people who were killed during the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. A lack of material resources makes it difficult for Pine Ridge life to change. Public utilities such as water, sewer, and electricity are either limited or absent in many rural parts of the reservation. There are no banks. This makes it unfeasible for businesses to even want to locate there. Pine Ridge doesn't have many highways or paved streets either. As you can see, the condition of roads when it snows or rains limits accessibility for both residents and businesses. Despite their challenges, Lakota people are extremely resilient. The phrase "Matakuye Oyasin," or "we are all related," summarizes the way that the Lakota culture views its world. Everything is alive. A change that affects a single element in the ecosystem has implications for everything else. In harmony with this holistic or circular worldview, the concept of Tioshpaye embodies Lakota values, emphasizing the importance of family and generosity. When someone is hungry, they can go to family or a neighbor and will be taken in, even if the host family doesn't have enough for themselves. Although this means that everyone is still a little hungry, the group as a whole enjoys a higher level of food security. In the last few years, there's been a resurgence of interest in Lakota language and lifeways. The private K-12 Red Cloud School integrates traditional culture throughout the curriculum. 100% of its students graduate from high school and go on to higher education. 64 of them have been awarded Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholarships, the highest per capita of any school in the United States. In comparison, the 2014 Pine Ridge Public High School completion rate was just over 38%, and they're the same kids. The outside edict culture tends to view food security as something that is provided for people. Sioux Nation may be small, but it is the only full-service grocery store on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Many people don't have cars or can't afford the gas it takes to get to Sioux Nation, let alone go off the reservation. Regardless of income, families tend to buy food at small gas and convenience outlets that are scattered throughout Pine Ridge. When impoverished people shop for groceries, they often choose nutritionally poor foods such as carbs and fats. They are both rich in energy and cost a lot less. And that's what you see at gas stations and convenience stores anyhow. You might be surprised to learn that while Pine Ridge is the size of the state of Connecticut, there's only one commodity food distribution center. This is it. Even though the program now includes more produce and meats, most of the food is still either canned or shelf stable. Even worse, eligible people can only shop there once a month. For a long time, I thought that if commodities could expand access, offer healthier foods, and increase the amount of food that they were willing to give people, it could play an important role in ending reservation hunger. But when it comes to commodities, what is offered is a one-size-fits-all proposition. It is impossible for a national program to accommodate insider or EMIC cultural food preferences. This picture of the senior center at Porcupine epitomizes the hunger that grips the reservation. It was snowing that day. Mary and I dug through several inches of snow to dig out outdated bread to give to families. My transformational journey to learn more about ways to improve Pine Ridge food security involved accompanying a group of women elders in Porcupine. They sold beadwork to raise money for garden tools and seeds. I've helped them to find beads in the past. In addition to spending time with the women, my project included networking with garden organizations as well as finding sources for donated beads. All was well. Then the organization that had been tilling their garden suddenly changed focus to youth in a different community. That meant that my project needed to change directions as well. My efforts to reach out to the women was futile. It was as though they had disappeared down into the earth. A probable reason this occurred was because power relationships are inherent in the linear worldview of the outsider or edict culture. Someone is always above or below someone else. It goes without saying that I'm a member of that culture. When I asked the women if I could join their group, they probably mistrusted my intentions, even though it was never my idea to be telling anyone what to do. As I saw my project crumbling to dust, I experienced an epiphany. A picture of a beautiful path sparked the realization that following the way paved by the outsider edict culture was leading me nowhere. Boyd's citizen solution process that we studied in Nursing 802 wasn't working for me. What I needed was to step away from the familiar and support Lakota ways of knowing. An important and somewhat unsettling lesson for me was that the citizen action process is mostly ineffective when it comes to Pine Ridge. Mary, my cultural guide, began taking me to visit rural families who had gardens. All I did was listen. I asked few questions and rarely took pictures. The result was that I learned quite a bit about Lakota choices, values, and purposes in gardening. As I listened to my new friends, my project morphed into a journey of personal growth. I became increasingly aware of the pervasiveness of my outsider bias, especially when it comes to recognizing and honoring insider or emic ways to increase food security. I believe that the change in focus in my project was successful because I let go of any expectations about outcomes. I became more comfortable with unpredictable change. As my attention shifted towards the intangibles in my Pine Ridge relationships, I began to experience a transformation in my own worldview as well. Growing food in this typical Pine Ridge garden is an arduous undertaking. In order to water the plants, the family pumps water by hand and carries it about 75 yards to the garden. Every person I met told me that they were growing their food with the intention of sharing it with others or practicing tiosh paye. It is interesting to note that people who use sharing or tiosh paye report having a high level of food security. The opposite is true for people who receive food through government programs. They perceive their food security to be very low. The garden in the previous picture was planted entirely with traditional foods and herbs like these. At the Porcupine Community Center, I saw 2 enormous drums, almost completely full of outdated seed packets that had been donated by Walmart. When I looked closer and dug through them, I found that the kinds of seeds in this picture were hard to find. The bulk of them were for vegetables and flowers that the Lakota culture doesn't value. I've chosen an infinity loop as my model. Food security and interventions that are purely edict or representative of the outsider culture can be problematic. Since implementation is from the top down, power of the government is reinforced. People remain dependent. Because change usually involves the political process, solutions may change focus or lack sustainability. Progress is usually slow. In contrast, Lakota interventions are empowering because they tend to be culturally appropriate, involve traditional foods, and strengthen families and communities through tiosh paye or sharing. They are more sustainable. Because EMIC or insider solutions don't depend on the political process, they can be implemented more quickly. The Lakota people of today have their feet in two very different but constantly interacting worlds. The crossover point in the center of my model represents the pivotal role of nurses in the achievement of food parity for the Lakota people. Nurses occupy a unique position to support insider or EMIC ways of knowing, and also to advocate for outsider or edict policies that are more equitable for people who are poor. This waterfall is what became of that peaceful stream in Pipestone. Little did I realize when I took the picture that my DNP project would involve a journey which mirrored that of the stream. I know now that awareness of personal beliefs and prejudices is a never-ending process. I know that my cultural biases are rooted so deep inside me that it is frequently impossible to recognize the elephant in the room. I thought I'd known this before, but the lived experience really brought it home. In the words of Margaret Newman, our consciousness continues to expand throughout our lives. In conclusion, the way problems are solved in the outside or edict society are not enough by themselves to alleviate low Pine Ridge food security. Entrenched cultural bias prevents policymakers from thinking outside of the box for creative ways to mitigate this disparity. Insider or EMIC ways of knowing must be supported with at least equal weight in the change process. Nurses are uniquely placed to advocate for welcoming Indigenous voices into the national conversation about food security. Looking back, I realized that I went into my project with a white woman's cultural bias. Hubris led me to believe that somehow mainstream ways of providing food security might be tweaked to be more effective in Pine Ridge. I was wrong. It was only when I was able to recognize and let go of my limiting ideas that a viable path to Lakota food security appeared. Last year, I had the opportunity to present my project at the annual meeting of the Federated Garden Clubs of Minnesota. As a result, club members donated new garden tools and beads for women gardeners in Pine Ridge. Last October, I presented a poster about my project at the Transcultural Nursing Society's annual conference. After studying my posters in depth, 2 nurses identified themselves as Native Americans and said to me, "You've gotten it right." Then they thanked me for calling attention to the issue of low Indigenous food security. These are the references that I consulted during my project. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. Are there any questions?
Beth, that was beautiful. Thank you. I think you captured it beautifully.
Well, thank you, Lonnie. That means a lot to me because you've also been at Pine Ridge quite a bit yourself. Yes, Denise?
Yes, there's only one grocery store there, and it's the size of, so they're driving how many miles to get to this? Could they drive how many miles to get to the one actual grocery store?
Well, I don't actually know what's the most number of miles that anybody could drive, but Pine Ridge is the size of the whole state of Connecticut.
Right.
So if people are driving to Sioux Nation, which the whole section available for groceries and produce is maybe half again the size of this room lengthwise and crosswise. So it's very hard. If people are going off the reservation, they have, in the east, and Pine Ridge is on the western side of the reservation. So if people, if they don't want to drive to Pine Ridge and they live in the eastern half, I'm not sure exactly where those people go. they would have to drive probably well into the Rosebud Reservation, which is directly adjacent, in order to grocery shop. If people are from the western half or close to Pine Ridge, they would have the choice of either driving to Rapid City, which is about 90 miles away from the town of Pine Ridge. Of course, then you have to go further in town too, or else about 60 miles south to Chadron, Nebraska. So that provides a powerful impetus for people to buy their food where it's convenient, which is at gas stations. I can't tell you, when I was going around with Mary Mousseau, we would invariably stop at a gas station or a convenience store to buy prepackaged sandwiches or wraps or burritos that you could microwave. And the stores were full. They were packed full of people buying food, and there were even, they had baskets of food that they were buying to take home. I'm not sure what people do. People still do hunt and fish and forage for wild foods, and a lot of these traditional foods that were in the picture mimic traditional wild foods that people used to encounter when Lakota people had their lifestyle, where they would move about nomadic, or they were according to the annual migrations of the buffalo. But only about 3% of the food that people eat comes from hunting or fishing or foraging. I thought it was interesting to see that most people have a plum tree in their yard or garden, and wild plums are a traditional delicacy for the Lakota people, and they are highly prized. So this way, people are adapting to their traditional nutrition by planting foods that are somewhat related to what they used to enjoy in earlier generations. It's spirituality. It's a way of connection to the ancestors. Nutrition there is not seen in terms of calories and chemical reactions between our food and bodies the way it is in our culture. It's something entirely different. Yes?
Tell us about your quilt.
Oh, when I was up at Pine Ridge last summer, and it was time for me to leave, my friend Mary Mousseau said, I have something for you, and she pulled this closed drawstring bag out of the trunk of her car, and she said, "Don't open this until later." And so I got back to the hotel room, and I found this beautiful star quilt. And star quilts are given to honor people for various reasons in the Lakota culture. And when I called her to thank her about the quilt and ask her about it, she said that she had made it by herself. She didn't go out and buy it. So I haven't hung it up yet, but I do have it on a beautiful Amish quilt rack in my bedroom. Are there any more questions? Well, thank you again, everyone. And I would like to additionally say thank you to Cheryl, who's been my advisor all through my journey at Augsburg. And she has been instrumental in the growth and change that has occurred.
You truly have transformed your thinking over the last 3 years, from the time you came in to our program to today. It's a huge transformation, so that's awesome.
Well, we know what we know in our culture, and we don't know that there can be anything else, but it can't be as good as ours because we don't know about it.
That's right. Yeah, nice job.